Hi, and thank you for joining us on Career Ed Live today. My name is Denny Daugherty, and I work in the Office of Career Education. I've got two of my excellent colleagues from my office here, so if you'd like to introduce yourselves, whoever would like to go first.
My name is Jennifer Brown, and I'm the Assistant Director for Student Engagement and Marketing here in the Office of Career Education.
And I'm Ashley Vanderpool. I work alongside with Denny and Jennifer, and I'm the Career Exploration Experience Coordinator in the Office of Career Education.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm Senior Career Development Specialist. I suppose I probably should have said my my title. So, but anyway, today we're going to be talking about objective versus profile statements on a resume. So, which one should you use in your unique situation? Are they counterparts? Is one better than the other? We're going to jump into that a little bit. So you'll have not only my perspective, but you'll have also a perspective from two great people in my office. And because I know when I go to do a presentation, I definitely share my thoughts with students, but this is kind of like a meeting of the minds, so we can put our intelligence and our experience and all of this here together. So I'm just really excited to see where the discussion goes. So let's see, we'll go ahead and kick it off with some of the questions I was brainstorming a few minutes ago. So we're going to start with objective statements, and my reason for starting on those is I've always kind of, in my career services type training, which extends to where I used to work in addition to Marshall, was always kind of taught objective statements are kind of for beginners and try to put a profile statement on when you can. So I always kind of think of them as being earlier on than a profile statement. We can discuss that too. So that's just why I'm thinking of them first. But what are your thoughts on objective statements? And is there ever a time that it's okay to use one? So let's take it away. Whoever wants to jump in.
Okay, well, I'll start. So when I was in college, which was several years ago, I won't tell you the exact year, a couple of years ago when I was in college in my undergrad, I was actually taught to add my resume. One of my professors highly encouraged it. So I had one on there. When I started applying for jobs and I was interviewing, one of the questions that I always asked was, of course, where do you see me fitting in this company? Is there anything that I can do to further improve myself in the future during interviews? And I had a recruiter that was very blunt once that just came out and told me, you need to take your objective statement off of your resume, and it's kind of wasting your space. And the way that she explained it to me was that your resume is kind of like a short glimpse of you. So think about when you're, and I'm going to use the example of going to the library, as cheesy as it is. Think about when you're going to the library, you're picking up books, you don't really know much about the book. What's one of the first things that you do, or one of the first things that I do, of course, is just read the back or read like the very short description. It's usually just a few paragraphs kind of explaining an overview of what the book's about. And then if I'm interested, then I'll take the book home and fully read it. Interviews kind of work the same way. When you apply for a job, your resume is kind of like that short glimpse on a book. They're skimming it. They're not even fully reading it.
Yeah.
So as we're looking over things, if something doesn't catch your attention on a resume within the first top 1/3 of that resume, it's not going to encourage the recruiter to continue reading your book for say, or it's not going to encourage them to contact you to come in for an interview to get to know you better. So the top 1/3 of your resume is most important. And I always say don't waste it with an objective, unless there's a couple, a few examples where you could have an objective and that would be important to include. But most cases, I would say no.
Yeah, so Ashley, unsurprisingly, said everything that I was going to say as well. I think an objective statement is very outdated. It's something that was pushed a lot, and really now I tell students you don't want to waste that valuable real estate on your resume. And I know for myself, when I was in college and writing them, that was always the hardest 1 or 2 sentences on the resume, and I would get so stuck on trying to make that objective statement perfect without using I, without using, all these different things, and it would just really slow up the process for me when it really doesn't make that big a difference. That first, top half of the resume, you want to have your skills in there. That says so much more about you than a 1 sentence. And I also say that cover letters take the place of that objective statement. You can get more punch for that. So cover letters is a whole nother conversation, but that's, you know, kind of how I feel about objective statements as well. I think they're old fashioned. You don't need to waste your space on it. And there are just much more valuable things that you can say about yourself rather than that one sentence.
Excellent. I think really, really good thoughts. And something I know Jennifer had touched on too is you talked about how difficult it can be to craft a really good objective statement, which to me tells me that an objective statement should be more than to get a job or to get an accounting job, because I've seen resumes in the time I've worked here where literally that's about what they say. I don't know if I've ever seen to get a job, but I've seen to get a job in the accounting field. And I'm like, well, that's, in addition to all of the other things we've said up till now, it's so obvious. It's almost, I think you look bad for stating something so obvious.
Yeah, I'll offer up a duh.
Yeah, duh. I don't know if recruiters give them a red pen and let them write duh on resumes. Now, the second thing I wanted to talk about, if you do run across someone who is committed to their objective statement, and we already talked about how they're probably not the best fit, at least in most cases, what advice would you give if someone is committed to that objective statement, they want to do it, to make an objective statement, whether it should be there or not, the strongest that it could be? Do you have any words of advice?
So, sorry.
Go ahead.
That's one of the worst things about virtual is you never know who's going to go first. I almost feel like you need to play like rock, paper, scissors to kind of get started. But with objectives, I've had a few students that have kind of given great arguments as to why they need to keep it. For one, a lot of students don't have enough information to fill a one-page resume. And if that's you, that's okay. You can keep your objective if you're really just, you know, really tied to it. If you would like to keep your objective for a space filler, because of course you want your resume to be one full page with a lot of detail and you don't want a ton of white space at the end. So if you do need that for a filler, then you can include it. I would just encourage you to not have such a broad objective statement. Sometimes when we're applying for jobs, if we simply state, and I'm going to use a marketing major for an example. If you were a marketing major and you said, I'm seeking a full-time marketing position with a reputable company. I see that one a lot, or with like a well-known company, or, you know, kind of generic. If I was a recruiter and I saw that, I would automatically think this person made one resume. They're probably applying for 50 to 100 jobs with this one resume. And they kept it so broad, they didn't keep a company's name in there or any really specifics because they're utilizing this one resume on repeat. That's something you want to avoid, because every time you you apply for a job, you should actually be tailoring your job for that particular position. So if you do want to keep your objective, make sure that it's not a very broad one. And you want to avoid things that the company knows that it's a pretty broad statement, like with the well-known company, with a reputable company. Well, every company would probably say that about themselves. So just be a little bit more specific if you are really key on keeping that.
Yeah, and I would say it's important to have the conversation as to why you want to keep that on your resume. So like Ashley said, if you're wanting to keep it because maybe you're not filling out a page, there are other ways that we can get you to a page. Relevant coursework, volunteer experience. If you have done babysitting in the past and you don't have that on your resume because you think, well, that's not a real job. It is a real job and you've gained skills from that. We want to put that on there. You know, projects that you've worked on in class, we can get very detailed in talking about it. So if it's an example of maybe I don't have a full page, we can probably help you get to a full page. If you're just very strongly set to having that objective statement, then again, like Ashley said, just not making it too broad.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Yeah, wonderful. And I think both of you, excellent thoughts. And I agree with everything that you've said. And my thoughts, I think they're going to lead us into the third question here too, is one of the things I try to get a student to think about is portraying themselves as an up and coming professional and not a student. And it's not that there's anything wrong. I mean, I love students or I wouldn't work in education, but the resumes, they're not for me, you know, they're for employers. So I always encourage students to be thinking about how is that future employer going to see them. And a lot of students, between their coursework, some of the internships and things they've done, extracurricular participation, they can start to market themselves as an up and coming professional in that field, you know, versus a student. And I think I do some informal talks about branding with students about how to brand themselves. And if you can start to brand yourself as a rising professional in that field, to me, that's better. And I think it just shows more direction than what an objective statement does, because, and I agree with all of the objective statement shortcomings up to this point in time we've discussed, but there always is kind of that element. The other problem with objective statements, they tend to state the obvious. So in addition to everything else that we've said. So that's kind of, I've already talked a little bit about why I think a profile or a professional statement, there's a couple different words we use to describe them. And if you know of any others, feel free to throw that in too. But do you want to talk a little bit more about why a professional or a profile statement might be a better fit for a resume if someone does want to have a statement like that on their resume?
Jennifer, are you team profile statement, or are you completely against that as well?
I'm team talk about your skills and relate it to the job. So if you feel more comfortable bullet pointing your skills, bullet point them. If you feel more comfortable writing them in a paragraph form, do that. So for me, the most important thing is getting your skills across. You want the person who's reviewing your resume to see at the very top and think, check, check, check. I want to bring this person in. They have the skills that we're looking for. So whichever format you want to use it in, that's how I want you to feel comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel the same way, which is kind of surprising because normally when you speak with 3 different people about resumes, sometimes you can get, I wouldn't say 3 totally different responses, but you can get different tips. I think that whichever way you feel more comfortable with, as long as you're following the rules, not referring to yourself in first person, those sorts of things, and making sure that if you are having it in paragraph form, it's not, you don't overdo it. 3 to 4 sentences is plenty. We do not need an entire novel.
Exactly.
Every single skill that you have. And when I tell students, list your skills, make sure that you're explaining your skills, it's easy to want to list every single skill that you have. So just keep it short, brief, and only have a few skills that you feel are most important. On my resume, for example, I actually kind of do both. I have just 1 or 2 sentences, and then below that I have a bullet point, just a few. So, I mean, you could do a combination as long as it's not too lengthy. We don't want to fill up an entire half of a page just on your skills section.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And really, the 4th question I had on my sheet here: share some tips for writing an excellent profile or professional statement. I think we've already covered that to a large degree, so I want to just kind of move on to question number 5, and that's and if you want to talk about it in terms of like a profile statement or even marketing your skills, maybe what are some things to not include? So I think so far we've been talking about things to include, but what are some landmines that people tend to step on, some things that'll blow up in our face if we're not careful? What thoughts do you have on that?
Well, I have several. I'll just start with one, and I guess I can kind of jump back and forth. But one of my first ones, of course, is just being more specific. I should be able to look at your objective statement or summary or skills section, or however you want to entitle it on your resume, and know what career path you're going into. So you don't want to be too generic. If we're just simply listing, I have great communication skills, I have great teamwork skills, that's great. But that's not really tailored for the type of career that you're wanting. So there should be keywords in there that let me know what career you're going into just by looking at that one section on your resume.
Mm-hmm. And you also want it to correlate or correspond to the responsibilities that you've listed out in your previous work experience. Mm-hmm. You shouldn't have skills that are maybe all computer based, and then in your work experience you are kind of customer service. It doesn't really match. It doesn't make sense. So you can list out those skills on the top, and then you want to give examples of how you earned those skills through your experience. So making sure that your resume flows as a whole is important in that too.
Absolutely, and something very related to that I've told students is don't put anything on a resume that you're not prepared to back up. And I'll share an example. There was a position I had applied to and interviewed for here at Marshall. It was less than a year before the job I got here in career education. It's probably best just not to say where it was or who was involved, but there was someone on campus that was going through line by line on my resume, and it's someone I dearly love and respect now that I've gotten to work with them. But she said, what do you mean by this? Tell me more about this. What is that skill? I think on my resume at one of my previous jobs, I think it was where I was an adjunct, I'd said something like, I participated in events designed to foster academic growth. And she's like, what? I think that's when she called, I don't want to say called me out on them. She asked for clarification. And it turned out there was like a panel for students who were thinking about going to grad school. And I participated in like a panel discussion one night. And I told her about that. And she said, oh, okay, that's pretty neat. But if I was just trying to fluff my resume and was kind of caught off guard, deer in the headlights type situation, when they asked me that, and she did kind of put me on the spot with it, so I was just kind of happy I had a good example ready to go. But don't inflate your resume and don't put anything on there. I've even been asked about some conferences, some trainings that I've done. So everything on there is fair game to be grilled on, basically. So make sure you put on things that you're prepared to I don't even know if I want to say defend, but things you're prepared to elaborate on.
Yeah, I have another example for that. We always talk about get involved in organizations so that you can put that on your resume. Now, if you attended a meeting about, let's say, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, and you put that you're a member on that, I'm going to assume that you are very involved in it. Mm-hmm. And you never know, that person that is interviewing you may have grown up in that program and they were a little sister for someone, and that helped shape their whole life. And so they feel very passionate about it, and they are so excited that you were involved in that too and want to talk to you about it. And you're like, oh, well, I only attended a meeting. So while we want you to have these great things to put on your resume, make sure they're legitimate and that you can talk about them. And it's not, I attended one meeting, so I'm a part of this organization. Mm-hmm. I know that's later on in your resume, but as Denny says, you don't want to inflate, and you always hear, don't lie on your resume because it will come back to smack you in the face.
Yeah. And to kind of piggyback on that, be careful with what descriptive words you're using for each one of your skill statements and your adjectives. I was in a very awkward situation a few years ago where I was doing, luckily it was just a mock interview, because had it been a real interview, I would have probably cringed if I was the candidate. But on his resume, he said that he was fluent in Spanish. Well, the woman beside me actually taught Spanish several years ago. She was a retired teacher. So she was so excited to see that on the skills section. So she starts speaking in Spanish during that interview, and the student just looks at her like blank face, did not know what to say. So be careful. If you've only taken one Spanish class in high school, maybe we don't use the word fluent. So just be careful with how you're describing your skills.
Yeah, definitely. I started chuckling because I pretty much knew where that was going. It was probably another one of those deer in the headlight moments. So yeah, the point of everything we're talking about is you want to market yourself the best as you can, but you want to do so in an accurate fashion. Basically, don't undersell, don't oversell yourself either. Don't in such a way where you cannot deliver what you're promising. But of course, you don't want to undersell your skills. Either accurately representing yourself is, I think, the best way to find the best position for you. So there's also another article here. It was actually from Handshake, which if anyone, just as a side note here, anyone who's not sure what Handshake is, this is a great new program that my department uses. You can investigate companies, look for internships and jobs. You can schedule appointments with my office. You can upload documents for review, among other things. Those are some of the leading uses for it. But Handshake had a great article about myths that can keep you from getting hired. So I wanted to delve into that in just a moment. And the ones I want to focus on, I think, are even outside of Handshake. I think they're just good general hiring principles. I think they kind of fit in with our discussion as well. But on the objective profile statement, resumes, does anyone have any other thoughts, anything to jump in with? I think this has been a great discussion. I love the interaction. I love the examples. But any other parting thoughts before we move on?
Obviously, we are here if you need help in writing, figuring out how you want to put your words together. But there are also really great resources online to help you format a really nice statement. They may, ask you questions like, what are your top 3 strengths? What do you want to do in the future? And then it puts together a really nice statement for you. So obviously, come in and see us. We want to help you as much as we can. But there's also really great resources online as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And as much as we want everyone to have really great developed resumes after they graduate college, we also don't want you spending hours and hours stressing about your resume.
Uh-huh.
So if you feel stuck, don't feel like you have to formulate this amazing profile statement without help. We are here to help you. And I think Jennifer had previously mentioned that was her experience while she was writing her resume. She just couldn't figure out how to just complete a few sentences on the objectives. And it is difficult. Don't spend hours just on that one particular section. Fill out the rest, then contact us and we'll help you with that one section.
Absolutely, I think that's a case too, where that outside perspective can really be useful. I think we probably struggle to describe ourselves more than we do other people. Because I know people in this office I work with, I feel like I'm pretty adept at saying, yes, these are Ashley's strengths, these are Jennifer's strengths, and by the both of y'all have great strengths. I feel like I can articulate that. If it were me, I'm like, well, it's not only I talk to students about this too. Not only do sometimes we feel like we're bragging and we feel like we shouldn't be taught to, or we're taught not to brag, and we feel like we're doing what we shouldn't be doing, which again is a whole other discussion. But also I don't even know how, in a lot of cases, how accurate we are at judging ourselves. I think some people are, but I see a lot of people who really think a lot of themselves, and some people really undersell themselves too. I've seen countless examples of each. So having that third party expertise can also come in handy in situations like that as well.
And in you saying that, Denny, it makes me think of, okay, if I'm sitting here and maybe I can't think of what my strengths are, Focus 2 is a great tool. It's a career assessment that you go through and you answer a bunch of different questions. It takes about 30 minutes, and it gives you, areas that you're strong in, and that could help you identify, oh, I am strong in this. Yes, I do like to do this. And that can help you fill out that portion of your resume as well. And it'll also give you some different jobs or careers that you may be interested in looking into. So it's a win-win.
Yep.
It is. Mm-hmm.
I do the same, just looking at jobs on Handshake, and I encourage students to do that as well. If you're interested in one particular career path, start searching for jobs on Handshake, pull up those applications, see what skills and what type of descriptions are listed for that job. I can almost promise you that as you're going through those different skill sections and responsibilities, requirements, that you actually already meet a lot of those, and you can add that to your resume as well.
And I'll add in one more thing, and this could be a whole nother conversation as well. And I think maybe you've done a Career Ed Live on it, but LinkedIn is a great way to see where your peers are rating themselves with their skills. If you go on Marshall's page on LinkedIn and look at the alumni, you can see all the different skills for someone who also graduated with a marketing major. And they may think of skills that you haven't thought of, and you think, oh, I have that too. I want to add that to my resume. So LinkedIn is another way to kind of go through and self-assess yourself.
Definitely. And there's a lot of, I think, general things and a lot of very career specific things on LinkedIn as well. It's a great, I shouldn't even say this. I've told students in presentations, I like it. I'm a little skeptical on any type of social media, but that being said, LinkedIn's a very necessary thing to use. I did a presentation a couple years ago for that graduate conference we worked on, and this is in like 2018 or so, something like 48% of employers, if you had no digital footprint, that was viewed as negatively, as having a negative digital footprint, and it was going up every year. And yeah, I'm quoting like a 2018 statistic, so it may have flipped over past 50% at this point in time. That wouldn't surprise me at all. So the point of the matter being, even if you're not one to put all of your business out there, you at minimum, if you're going to be job seeking, you should have a professional LinkedIn. Even if you're not a what is it, TikToker or Facebooker or whatever, all that stuff, and that's fine. But if you have at least a professional LinkedIn profile, that's something I'd recommend to any student. So wonderful, really wonderful thoughts on that.
Yeah. One more thing. Sorry. Your resume is a living document, meaning it's never fully completed. You should always be adding to it. And LinkedIn is a great way to have that full resume because, we may say try to stick to a page. If you get on and you're in grad school and you've had other experiences, we may say to go on to 2 pages. So you want to have the most relevant information on that. But LinkedIn is a place where you can have everything that you've done class projects, presentations, all of that. And it's a good place to think, okay, maybe I might pivot the way I want to go with my career. And things I did 5 years ago are really relevant to what I want to do now, but I've taken them off my resume. I can't remember what they were. You've got it on your LinkedIn profile. So another plug for LinkedIn. If it's not your thing, I would consider having a catch-all resume, just one where you go and anytime you do anything, whether it's professional development related to your career, volunteering, anything like that, add that to your resume and keep a growing document so that you can narrow it down and pick and choose what you want to submit for each different kind of job.
Definitely. Wonderful. Really wonderful thoughts on that. So it was funny. I got distracted for a second. I think in the background, I heard a truck going by Jennifer's window and went by my window. Really random. I get distracted by the wackiest of things. But some of the myths here, I want to switch gears a little bit. Top job search myths that could keep you from getting hired on Handshake. I just want to talk about a couple of these. And two of the three I think are useful outside of Handshake too. But the first one, myth, is that it's not important to update my Handshake profile because employers don't look at it. So what I work with Handshake some, but I'm interested to see what feedback would you have to that myth? Because I've got a nice little paragraph here I can share, but I'd love to hear some firsthand experience. So
I'll say Handshake is set up very similarly to LinkedIn, actually. And it's a great way to, if you maybe don't want that LinkedIn profile, to go on and keep a running log of everything that you've done. Because employers can go in and look at that if you choose to have a public profile. But again, it's a good place to store all the information about yourself that you don't want to forget. So if you choose to make it public, then I would keep that as up to date as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I personally like to keep all of my information as up to date as possible. Just for me, I like for my resume to match my LinkedIn, to match my Handshake profile. You want everything to honestly match. Especially with dates, I think it's important to make sure at least your dates match on everything. You don't want to be called out for having the wrong date on one social media account versus your resume. So I like for everything to match. In addition, I'm someone that loses something digitally pretty frequently. So I've had times in the past where I'll save my resume to one computer. I don't have that handy. I find a job I really want to apply for. I'm like, I have to go home and get my resume. If you already have your resume uploaded on Handshake, you already have your profile completed. It's going to be so much easier at any time, no matter what computer you're utilizing. You can pull up your Handshake profile, pull up that resume, and apply for it. You don't have to wait till you go home.
That's, yeah, wonderful. And I agree with both of your sentiments on that too, keeping things up to date. And that's something I tell students a lot too, because hopefully, and this has been an unusual year for it, but hopefully students are here taking advantage of opportunities both on and off campus. But if you cover a lot of ground in a little bit of time, it can be easy to forget those opportunities and things that might help you later on. So however you do it, you want to be sure. I even tell students, I recommend a minimum of once a semester pulling up a resume, making sure it's up to date. If it is best case scenario, you reviewed it, you're out of 3 minutes of your time and you're good to go. But or who knows, maybe you found that it does need some help. So definitely keeping track of. Because when I tell students too, when you get to my age or somewhere around our ages, we slow down a little bit. Life's a little more consistent, which is nice in some ways. But when you're a student, there's all kinds of new stuff all the time hitting you. And if you're not careful, you can forget to log some really great opportunities. So definitely be mindful of that. So the second myth, and like I said, these last two are going to be a little bit more even outside of Handshake. I can't apply for a job if I don't match the employer preferences. So even the employer preferences or even like stated qualifications in a job posting, what are your thoughts on that? I'll go first this time. I've read through articles that a good rule of thumb is even if you have roughly 70% of the qualifications, you can throw your hat in the ring. Doesn't mean you'll be the most competitive candidate, but you're not completely crazy for it. Because sometimes you apply for something and it's a little bit of a reach. A lot of people apply for a job that's a reach and they get it and they grow their careers that way. But a rule of thumb I've read is about 70% or so of qualifications. So what's your feedback on that?
I think if you feel confident that you can do the job, apply for it. What's the worst that could happen? You waste about 30 minutes getting your resume in order, writing that cover letter, and filling out whatever kind of application they make you fill out, even though you've already got your resume. You do have to go back and fill that in. Go ahead and apply. You never know. You may be the best person who has applied for that position, and you get it, and you can then thrive and continue to build those skills. So if you feel confident that you can do the job, there are ways that you can talk about your skills to match up with a job. Not any job, but you can make it work to talk about how you can do it. So I say go for it.
Yeah, when I first graduated with my bachelor's degree, I'll just say that I don't think I fully qualified for any of the jobs that I applied for. Most of them, because, as soon as you finish your degree, you don't have a ton of experience in the field. You might have some internships and volunteering, but actual full-time work experience in the field, you normally don't have a lot. And when I started looking for jobs, most of them said all of the other skills that I needed, but that one number always threw me off. And it was usually, how many years of experience do you have? So some of them was, you need 5 years of experience, you need 3 years. I never had that. I went ahead and applied. In addition, if you see that you meet at least, 70-ish% of that particular position requirements, think about all those other skills that if you do get the job, you're going to have all those by the time you finish them to kind of move on and further your career in the future. So yeah, I say apply as long as you meet at least most of them, just because if not, I would have never applied for any jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah, that 2 to 5 years is a really arbitrary number when it's an entry level position, because, and I don't even know why they keep putting that on job descriptions nowadays, because if you're getting out of college, yes, you can count internship as experience, but even if you worked a full year in an internship, it still doesn't count as a full year of experience. So that's such a arbitrary number at this point. I wouldn't let that, if that's the one thing that's stopping you from applying for a position, go ahead and apply for it. Where the years of experience really start to kick in and matters when you get to the mid-level kind of positions, like assistant director, assistant manager, those kinds of levels. For most entry-level positions, straight out of college, absolutely apply for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And then something I've seen too is, well, a couple considerations again on years of experience. There are ways to count things you've done in college and other part-time experiences toward that. I've even seen job postings, so they actually have a formal, like a formula that they use, like so many, like 2 years of part-time equals 1 year of full-time. I've seen that, but again, I really tend to agree with both of you all if you can make the case. And on the flip side of things too, I've worked with people that have done the same job for 15 years that are, I don't know how much I trust them with. I'll just leave it. Not here. I'm talking about previous cases. But with my point simply being is that years in the field doesn't always translate to a capable, engaged, competent, go-getter type of an employee. So,
absolutely, quality doesn't always equal quantity. So
exactly, there are people who get a job and coast for 15 years and do nothing to, So that's that's what I'm not calling anyone out by name when I said that. I'm referring to people prior to Marshall, but I've seen people get very stagnant in a position. They can well exceed the years, but I don't know how much more I throw at them really. So the last myth here, and then I think we'll probably take questions, and then we'll be probably after that in good shape to wrap it up for today. But the last myth is you can't really make a connection with employers at virtual recruiting events. Now, I'll preface it with, I'm optimistic that the way things are going with vaccines and all that, I'm optimistic that maybe we've seen the bulk of virtual recruiting events. But the flip side of that is, there can be some advantages to doing that, including logistical, travel, and all that. So I have a hunch the virtual's not going to completely go away. Hopefully it's drastically reduced. I don't know that it's going to completely go away, and of course I'm just conjecturing right now. But if a student says it's hard to make a connection with an employer at a virtual event, what advice would you have for that?
So in the past year, we have had a virtual career expo, and this past semester, this current semester, we just came back in person to do an in-person. And I will say that it's all in how you approach the situation. You are going to get one-on-one conversations, whether it be in person or through a virtual networking. It's the preparation that you put in before, and that's for in person or virtual. You should do your research on the company. You should have questions prepared. You shouldn't just, log on to something and say, well, why should I work for your company? That's not a good impression to leave on a recruiter. You want to say, I found this. I love your mission. I love your vision. I want to be a part of this company. What kind of positions do you have available? So it's the research that you do ahead of time that helps you make the most out of virtual or in-person situations. If it's a kind of networking event online where maybe there was a presenter and you're watching as a participant, utilize the chat section. You can create good connections in the chat to where you may schedule some meeting time outside of this 1 hour presentation where you can talk one-on-one through that. So just utilize the different tools that are available to you, and I think you can get a lot out of any networking situation.
It's really good.
Yeah, in addition with that, just to kind of piggyback off what Jennifer said, I think being able to show your ability to switch from an in-person opportunity versus a virtual one shows your ability to be adaptable. I've spoke with students that will tell me, I just graduated, I don't plan on applying until things go back in person. And for me, I kind of think that's a mistake. I think you should show that you do have the ability to be flexible. If things change throughout the company, you're able to kind of bounce back quickly and adapt to new situations. So for me, I prefer in person, of course, but there's a lot of good when it comes to virtual, especially with interviewing. That's saving you an hour drive somewhere.
Yeah.
So that alone for me, that's given me an hour before the interview. Instead of being in the car nervous, I can just be at home looking at my information, just reviewing my information. I can take a breath versus trying to find a place to park somewhere and run across a campus or wherever it is that I'm applying for. So there's pros and cons to both.
Yeah, and students who are graduating now, you are entering the work field with experience that students 5 years ago don't have. You have had to pivot and you've had to adapt to change. You've had to learn new programs on the fly. These are all really great skills that you now have because of this weird and crazy time that we've been in for the last year and a half. And you certainly want to highlight those skills when you're talking about yourself. I do see virtual interviewing being a lot more popular. It was starting to get popular. I think now we're seeing we shouldn't waste money on a plane ticket to bring someone in unless it's like, president of university or something. But for those entry-level positions, you probably are going to be doing virtual interviewing. And that's why it's important to get comfortable in these kinds of situations, because that's probably how you're going to be doing it. So networking, doing it this way just provides more and more practice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think too, I agree with that practice component and just you're really putting yourself out there and embracing the opportunities. And if something much like in person, if something doesn't go well, kind of do a little bit of a debrief afterward. What did I do well? What are some things I can work on? And I always approach this type of thing through a communication lens. I'm a two-time communication major, and the purpose has not changed, but the communication channel has. And really, that's the biggest thing that has changed. The goals and objectives of a virtual interview have not changed. So you want to show not only your competence, but it's good to show that you're personable, that you can relate well with others, and you can make connections, and you want to show all of those things. On the surface, it can be a little bit harder to do maybe through a monitor, but again, just like any communication, I mean, the first job interview I went to, I think I was a wreck. The first day of school in kindergarten, I was a wreck. Yeah, but I got better. I went back and I learned what to do and what not to do. And this is just, I think, just yet another one of those circumstances where we need to do that. So, are there any final? Because we're right about, I think, time-wise where I wanted to be. So, does anyone have any parting thoughts on anything? And if not, we'll see if we have any questions. And I think this has been a great discussion. But any other parting thoughts? Or
No, just utilize the free services here at Marshall. Get connected with our office. Follow us on Instagram. We provide a lot of great tips. Stay up to date on upcoming events on campus, like those expos. Any sort of free practice that you can get while you're a student here at Marshall, the better.
And our Instagram is at Marshall U Career.
Instagram, and we have a YouTube channel. This will be on our YouTube channel. This doesn't require editing like the podcast, so hopefully before the day is out, I'll have this posted, hopefully. So those are some new virtual outreaches. Again, we were headed this direction, but the events of the last year, it was very timely. We've needed to find new ways to connect with students. So we have a lot of resources that we offer you in addition to just keeping up with what we do. So definitely check us out. Check us out in those areas. Bailey, do you have any questions for us? Is there anything that we could clarify or add to, or anything of that nature?
Hi, yes, I was writing stuff down, so I have a couple. Whenever she was talking about like when people just have like a blanket resume and send it to like 100 people, can you put like a specific company name in a resume?
So that's where I would utilize your cover letter. Your professional statement, you maybe could put a company in there, but I personally would leave that off of a resume and then really focus your cover letter. So you may have a generic cover letter, but you need to always address the company and why specifically it's that company that you want to work for. So yes, your cover letter may be the same as you're applying for the same types of positions, but you always have to target it to the employer. So that's where you would really make it specific.
Yep, and just one of the things that I do is I don't add the company name in my resume. However, when I save that document, I always say Ashley Vanderpool resume dash, and then I'll add the company name. That way they know I specifically made that resume for them.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a good tip. And really, whether it's resumes or cover letters, because I think I've been on a couple of search committees here and I've seen this. And I've heard stories from other people that have seen this as well. If you do, well, on a cover letter you should, but even if you do on a resume, make sure that you don't send a resume to one company with a previous company's name in it, because I don't think there's a quicker way to get disqualified than to do that. So and it's one of those things. If you happen to see if you're happy in your job and you happen to see something that's maybe it would be a good change of pace. I don't know if you're at much of a risk for doing that, but if you're in the midst of a ferocious job search and it's job 34 out of 50 that you've applied for this month, I feel like maybe when I was starting out, maybe I did this, I hope not, but it can be easy to get a little bit sloppy. So you just want to be sure that you don't do that.
Okay, thank you guys. And then I had one question goes into the other one. So
okay.
I have a LinkedIn account and it's pretty updated. So do I need to should I make a Handshake one also? Like, would that be in my best interest?
Yes. So Handshake is our job database that we provide for students, and it's used. I think it's the #1 job database. We were previously on Job Tracks. That's another one. But it's probably the best place to job search, and you can apply for positions through Handshake, and that's why you want to have that profile completely set up as well. And based on things that you've put in your profile, companies can reach out to you via Handshake. So LinkedIn is really great, I would say, for networking. There are some jobs on LinkedIn, but as far as applying for jobs and going that route, Handshake is where you want to do that.
Mm-hmm. And I think with Handshake too, I've noticed that, and I always said the same thing about simplicity as well. I feel like there's a higher percentage of entry-level positions on there versus if you go to Indeed or some other. There's no really shortage of online job, like a job posting, job billboards, things like that you can go to. But what you'll see is a lot of times there'll be positions where they want that 5 to 10 years of experience, and they are kind of like Jennifer said, the mid-level job. They're not aimed necessarily at the recent graduate, or even if they are, you're going to be competing against people who aren't recent graduates. And especially if you're in a situation where the economy's kind of been turned on its head like it has been in the last year. Even if it's an entry-level job, if someone has a lot more experience and they're competing with you for the job, I mean, that's just something to bear in mind. Whereas I personally feel that more entry-level opportunities exist on Handshake, so I would definitely check it out. Not to mention, if you're in the midst of a serious job hunt, I think it's important to kind of attack from all angles, so to say. So.
And I'll give a personal anecdote. When I was job searching right after college, I graduated with a public relations degree, and I found a job through Monster, and it said that it was public relations, and I went on the interview, and they took me to a coffee shop, and we sat outside, and we were basically selling things to people as they came in. I was like, this is not PR. So on Handshake, we have trust scores. And so a company might post a position to us and to West Virginia State because they want a student from West Virginia. Through our two universities, we can say whether or not we think this company is reputable, and we give them a trust score. And so that helps keep those kind of scam type positions from getting through so that students aren't seeing them.
Absolutely, especially when we apply for jobs on Monster or Indeed or any of those other online job search engines, you're sending them your resume. Now, there's not a ton of personal information we hope on your resume, but just be mindful of that. Make sure that you at least take time to research the company beforehand. That's one reason why I love Handshake, because it kind of takes that work side of it out for you, because we've already researched the company for you.
Mm-hmm. Which that's a really good consideration, because if kind of take it a step further, if you're not careful, you could be sending a really shady outfit like your home address. And I don't know what the odds of something bad happening from that are, but again, these days, I think just, better safe than sorry type, I think type of thinking is a good way to approach it. So that was a really good question. What other questions?
Well, my other question was answered, because I was going to ask, like, what is the difference in, like, what's the best thing LinkedIn can provide, and then what's the best thing Handshake can provide, but my question was answered on that, so.
And I think too, with whether it's LinkedIn or even just in person, LinkedIn is definitely not the only way to network, but networking is huge. I took it down. I used to have a sign right up here on my hutch in my office, but it's estimated that 80% of jobs, that's 80% of jobs are not posted on the internet anywhere. They're filled through networking, through, hey, I know a person type deal. And that's quite a bit. And I've said this in presentations before, when talking with students, and if you're sitting down, going through job boards and things like that's good to do. And you, especially if you're in an aggressive job hunt, you probably should be doing that. The problem lies in if that's your only strategy, you're probably missing out on a lot of opportunities. So you want to diversify on your strategies. And I think amongst, not to the other one's camp, I think LinkedIn's probably the strongest for networking opportunities as well. So getting your name out there on that, and just having a resume posted, and that can yet again have employers contact you. And of course, Handshake can do a little bit of that as well. So, yeah. Anyone else? Any other parting thoughts or questions or comments or anything else? Well, I want to thank Ashley and Jennifer for joining me today. I knew it was going to be a good discussion, and it was. This did not disappoint. I think we covered some great stuff. When I do work with amazing colleagues, and I think when you get any pairing of us together, I just love to see the discussions that come out of that. Today was no exception. I've really enjoyed this. I think Bailey, I think you've asked some really good questions as well. So I think it's been a really great discussion. So I want to thank everyone who participated. I also just want to thank everyone who joined us today watching Career Ed Live. If you've accessed this, hopefully if you've enjoyed this content, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we hope you'll join us next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, guys.